They didn't just conceal their missiles. They drove them deep into the heart of a mountain, carved out entire tunnel networks, reinforced every wall with layers of concrete, and essentially challenged the rest of the world to come try and find them. For a while, that strategy held up. The mountain became a fortress, and inside that fortress sat one of the most formidable ballistic missile stockpiles anywhere on the planet, sitting silent, secure, patient. But then the United States decided it had seen enough. And what followed rewrote the rules of modern warfare entirely. Everything we thought we understood about deterrence, about precision warfare, and about what it actually means to be untouchable in the 21st century got put to the test. You're watching Military Nexus right now. And this is one of those stories that sounds like it was ripped straight from a Hollywood thriller, except every single detail of it is real. It's actively unfolding as you're watching this, and its consequences are going to extend far beyond the mountains where it started, reaching every corner of the globe, no matter where you happen to live. Oil markets, maritime shipping corridors, alliance frameworks, the credibility of American hard power, all of it is directly tied to what just took place inside those mountains. So stay with us, because this story only deepens the further we go. Before we get into it, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video. We cover the stories that actually move the world. No noise, no agenda, just clear and honest analysis that lets you draw your own conclusions. And trust me, you don't want to step away from this one, because what comes later in this breakdown has direct implications for how global politics are going to unfold over the next several months. Let's go back to where this all began. Because to really grasp why the United States took such a sweeping, historically unprecedented step, you need to understand precisely what Iran had been constructing inside those mountains, how long that construction took, and why the scale of it was keeping senior military planners up at night in Washington, Tel Aviv, and allied capitals across the world. This is not a story that emerged last year. It's a story with roots stretching back decades, and it has been building quietly toward this breaking point for the entire time. Iran's ballistic missile program wasn't assembled in a rush. It was constructed methodically over many years, piece by piece, often under the radar, and sometimes with assistance from foreign actors who had their own strategic incentives for wanting American influence curtailed in the region. Over time, Iran developed one of the most expansive ballistic missile arsenals in the entire Middle East. Short-range systems capable of hitting nearby targets, medium-range platforms that could strike deep into neighboring territory, and eventually long-range missiles with a reach exceeding 1,000 miles. But what genuinely alarmed American military planners wasn't the number of missiles or even their increasing range. It was the deliberate, calculated decision about where to put them. Iranian strategists had spent years studying the anatomy of modern warfare with close attention to detail. They watched American-led air campaigns systematically demolish Saddam Hussein's military forces in the open Iraqi desert during the Gulf War, tanks, artillery, and armored columns shredded from the air before many of them could even engage. They observed how precision-guided munitions erased above-ground command centers and logistics hubs within hours of conflict beginning. And they drew a very clear strategic lesson from all of that observation. If you want any meaningful portion of your military capability to still exist after contact with American air power, you don't expose it in the open. You go underground. You go as deep as the engineering budget will allow. and that is exactly the path they chose. Long before the broader world was paying close attention, Iran began building what defense analysts now refer to as underground missile cities. These were not shallow hillside bunkers dug a few meters into the earth. These were massive, fully operational military installations carved directly into solid mountain rock, in some cases reaching hundreds of meters beneath the surface. These facilities reportedly contained ballistic missiles staged for launch, mobile transporter erector launcher vehicles, fuel and propellant storage, command and control infrastructure, maintenance workshops, and enough stored supplies to sustain crews indefinitely, even if the surface world above them had been completely leveled by conventional bombardment. Satellite imagery gathered over the years began revealing unusual activity signatures near several mountain ranges across western and central Iran. Intelligence. Analysts identified tunnel entrances that had been deliberately camouflaged to blend into surrounding rock faces, ventilation systems hidden among natural rock features, and access roads that seemed from aerial view to lead directly into a mountainside and simply end with no visible purpose. Iran's concealment discipline was thorough and patient. Major excavation work was conducted primarily at night. Removed rock and soil were distributed broadly across surrounding terrain, so overhead, imagery couldn't be used to estimate the volume of material displaced. Surface-to-air missile systems were positioned in the hills around these sites specifically to discourage reconnaissance aircraft from getting close enough to gather useful data. By the time Western intelligence agencies had assembled a reasonably coherent picture of what had been constructed, the scope of it was genuinely startling. Certain assessments suggested Iran had built enough underground capacity to shelter thousands of ballistic missiles along with all associated launch equipment, effectively immune to any conventional airstrike capability that existed at the time. The mountain was the armor, hundreds of meters of solid rock standing between American munitions and everything Iran had buried beneath them. And the honest, if uncomfortable, internal assessment inside the Pentagon was that even the most capable bunker-penetrating bombs in the U.S. arsenal at that moment had never been designed to punch through that volume of rock. For years, the most formidable conventional penetrating weapon available to American forces was the GBU-28, a serious and effective weapon capable of chewing through several meters of reinforced concrete before detonating. But a few meters of concrete is a very different problem from hundreds of meters of mountain rock. Against the scale of what Iran had constructed underground, the GBU-28 fell well short of what the mission required. Military planners understood this gap clearly long before it surfaced in public discussion. So quietly, far from press briefings and public announcements, the engineering work began on something in an entirely different category. What emerged from that work was the massive Ordnance Penetrator, officially the GBU-57. This weapon operates in a class of its own. It weighs over 30,000 pounds. It stretches nearly 20 feet in length. Its explosive payload is housed inside a casing engineered specifically to endure the violent forces of penetrating deep into rock before detonating. When early technical details about this weapon reached the public, defense analysts consistently described it as something without genuine precedent in the history of conventional warfare, a bomb designed with exactly one purpose: reaching places that nothing else could reach. Even with the GBU-57 available, planners retained concerns that Iran's deepest facilities might still be beyond reach. A classified enhancement program was quietly initiated. More precise guidance systems were integrated. The penetrating warhead was refined to survive even harder impacts at greater depths. Targeting technology was sharpened considerably. All of this was developed and tested in classified environments far from public awareness. The objective was straightforward, even though the engineering required to achieve it was anything but. Build a weapon system capable of reliably reaching whatever Iran had placed inside those mountains, no matter the depth, and doing it with confidence on the very first engagement. While the engineering side of this equation was developing, the geopolitical pressure continued accumulating in parallel. Iran wasn't using its missile arsenal purely as a passive deterrent, quietly tucked away for some hypothetical future contingency. It was actively supplying and equipping proxy forces operating across the region, groups that openly targeted American allies and, in multiple documented cases, launched drone and missile strikes directly against American military installations. Each additional attack, each American casualty or near miss, intensified political pressure inside Washington to respond with something more substantial than another cycle of sanctions, public statements, or private diplomatic signals. The internal debates within the Situation Room were, by available accounts, serious, prolonged, and often contentious. Some of the options presented were narrow and largely symbolic, strikes designed to communicate disapproval without materially altering the strategic environment. Others were sweeping in scope, historically significant, and carried the genuine risk of triggering a much broader regional conflict. Every person present in those conversations understood that striking Iran's buried missile infrastructure was not simply a military operational question. It was a decision with consequences that would move through global energy markets, regional security arrangements, and the credibility of American deterrence for years to come. On the Iranian side, there was no corresponding signal of restraint or flexibility. Iranian officials made public declarations that essentially dared Washington to attempt a strike on their underground network, framing it almost as an open invitation to try. Senior Iranian military commanders gave on-camera interviews boasting about the invulnerability of their mountain facilities, asserting that the United States could bomb those mountains continuously and permanently without disturbing a single thing happening hundreds of meters below. They were, by their own public account, completely untouchable. That kind of public confidence tends to produce a very specific reaction inside military planning circles. When an adversary openly and repeatedly declares on record that your most advanced capability cannot reach them, the institutional response isn't indifference. The response is to quietly ensure that something absolutely can reach them and to be fully prepared to demonstrate it. And that, by every credible account now available, is precisely what followed. The upgraded GBU-57, now equipped with enhanced guidance, improved penetration performance, and refined targeting integration, was certified operationally ready. The only aircraft platform in the world capable of delivering a weapon of this size into contested defended airspace without detection was the B-2 Spirit, one of the most sophisticated stealth bombers ever produced, a flying wing design that has maintained its technological edge for decades. Match the B-2 with the upgraded massive Ordnance Penetrator, and the result is a strike capability that at that point existed nowhere else on Earth. When the strikes were authorized and executed, the operational details that have since become available are genuinely remarkable. B-2 bombers launched from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri carry the range and endurance to reach virtually any target on the planet without requiring ground-based refueling, flying at altitude for extended periods while remaining effectively transparent to hostile radar throughout the mission. Each aircraft can carry multiple GBU-57 weapons simultaneously. Striking deeply buried hardened facilities with this level of precision required exact timing, reliable navigation across thousands of miles of flight, and total confidence grounded in years of testing that the weapon would perform exactly as intended on its first real-world combat employment. The physics of how the GBU-57 actually functions are remarkable when laid out clearly. Released from high altitude, the weapon accelerates to supersonic velocity as it descends nearly vertically toward its target. Its hardened steel casing, engineered specifically to maximize penetration on impact while shielding the internal explosive charge from the shock of entry, drives through successive layers of soil and solid rock before a precision-timed delayed fuse initiates detonation at a pre-calculated depth. When several weapons are released onto the same impact point in rapid succession, each subsequent bomb travels further down the channel opened by the one before it, achieving combined penetration depths. No single weapon dropped in isolation could come close to matching. Post-strike assessments assembled from satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and other collection methods reportedly described a degree of structural destruction that Iranian planners had genuinely never modeled and had publicly and repeatedly insisted was a physical impossibility. Defense analysts who reviewed the available intelligence and imagery characterized what occurred as a genuine threshold event, proof demonstrated in live operational conditions, not a testing facility, that deeply buried and heavily hardened underground infrastructure can be reliably engaged and destroyed using conventional, non-nuclear weapons. But here's the dimension of this story that most mainstream reporting consistently underweights. The physical destruction, as significant as it was, is only one part of what actually happened here. The psychological and strategic implications of these strikes arguably carry equal or greater long-term weight. Iran's entire underground missile network was built around a single foundational strategic assumption that American military capability had a hard ceiling, and that burying assets deep enough underground placed them permanently above that ceiling and beyond any realistic threat. That assumption had given Iranian leadership enormous operational confidence and broad room to act aggressively throughout the region, because they genuinely believed their core military infrastructure could not be reached regardless of what the United States chose to do about it. The moment that assumption was invalidated in real time with real evidence, the entire strategic picture inverted simultaneously. Facilities that Iran had invested years and vast resources constructing specifically because they represented security became something fundamentally different overnight. Known locations, geographically fixed, fully mapped, and now demonstrably targetable vulnerabilities. Iran had, without fully appreciating it, concentrated an enormous proportion of its most valuable military assets into a limited number of locations that the entire world now knows can be engaged and destroyed. The strategic equation didn't shift slightly. It reversed completely and almost instantaneously in ways that are very difficult to walk back. Those reverberations spread quickly, well beyond Iran's own borders. Regional allies and proxy groups that had incorporated Iranian missile capability into their own sense of strategic security began quietly questioning what those long-standing guarantees were actually worth going forward. Other regional powers began recalibrating their own positions because the balance of power in the region had visibly shifted, not only because of what physical infrastructure was eliminated, but because of what had now been publicly and irrefutably demonstrated as achievable for the first time. And since the Middle East has never operated in strategic isolation, those recalibrations extend outward into global oil markets, international shipping corridors, existing alliance commitments, and the broader credibility of American power projection across the world stage. Predictably, opinions on whether these strikes were the correct decision remain deeply and sharply divided, and that debate isn't approaching any resolution soon. Critics argue that military action of this magnitude carries serious escalation risk, reinforces the position of hardliners within Iran's political establishment, and makes future diplomatic progress substantially harder to achieve. Their position is that the sustainable path to containing Iran's missile program was always sustained international pressure and negotiated frameworks, not kinetic strikes, regardless of how precise and powerful. Supporters of the action counter that years of sustained diplomatic engagement produced minimal tangible change in Iranian behavior, that the underground facilities, real and growing direct threat to American forces and regional partners, and that allowing Iran to believe it had found a genuinely untouchable sanctuary was itself a strategic failure that would only have encouraged greater aggression over time rather than restraint. What almost no serious analyst disputes, regardless of where they personally land in that debate, is the sheer technical and historical significance of what occurred here. Military historians tracking the evolution of modern air power are already categorizing this as a genuine inflection point, live combat proof that deeply buried, massively hardened underground installations can be reliably targeted and destroyed using conventional weapons. And that message isn't addressed only to Iran. It's being studied extremely carefully right now in Pyongyang, in Beijing, and in Moscow by every government that has committed enormous national resources to similar underground military infrastructure over the years. No one wants to become the next demonstration case for just how vulnerable their own mountain fortress has quietly become. What Iran chooses to do next is genuinely the next chapter of the story, and it's a complicated one to forecast. Iran's leadership has historically preferred calibrated, controlled responses over open, full-scale escalation, largely because they have a clear-eyed understanding of the raw military power differential between themselves and the United States. A direct conventional war with America would be catastrophic for Iran, and no one in Tehran's decision-making circles is unaware of that reality. But Iran's internal political dynamics complicate that rational calculus considerably. The hardline factions that championed and built these underground complexes, who publicly staked enormous credibility on declarations of absolute invulnerability, are now facing serious political embarrassment and intense pressure from within their own base. That kind of pressure has a history of producing responses that feel politically necessary in the short term, but carry real risk of cascading further than any party originally intended, especially with active nuclear negotiations, ongoing proxy conflicts, and continued Israeli military operations, all running simultaneously across the region. Military Nexus will continue tracking every development in this story as it unfolds, because the decisions being made right now by American commanders, Iranian leadership, regional governments, and proxy forces operating on the ground are going to define the security landscape of this region for years ahead. One conclusion, however, already appears beyond reasonable dispute. Regardless of how the rest of this chapter plays out, the mountain is no longer the shield Iran built it to be, and the entire global calculation around underground military infrastructure from Tehran to Pyongyang to Moscow has just been permanently and publicly rewritten in front of the entire world. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what's actually happening here, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to Military Nexus if you haven't yet, and tell us in the comments what you think comes next.